Thank you so much, Dr. Benjamin, and also the Research Consortium, which is overseeing and managing the PLF via computer vision at Michigan State University. It's really great to be here. Today, we just take maybe 30 to 35 minutes to briefly talk about some of the examples of computer instrumentation approaches in understanding the adaptation physiology, behavioral, welfare, and health-related aspects of farm animals, mainly 3 species: chickens, poultry, swine, and dairy cows. Just a glimpse of a very high-level overview of the possibilities of visions and some examples of what has been done in this area. Digital phenotyping is gaining momentum both in the United States and also in Europe. When we use this word nowadays, we humans are using smartwatches, and there are many parameters, behavioral indicators, health-related parameters that are constantly measured moment by moment, data that is captured that provides a variety of telltale signs. For livestock farming, what we are looking at is how do we use this similar concept, similar phenomena to acquire new subtle signs, subtle information about farm animals. It's more of a cutting-edge approach to understanding the farm animal's emotions as well. So we can delve into clinical constructs, such as aggression and lameness, which can provide very detailed insights about indicators of animal welfare, both positive, neutral, and negative indicators, and also the productivity indices of the farm animals. It's very interdependent. There are many components associated with phenotyping. When we look at the high-level behavioral indicators, digital phenotyping helps to identify and interpret, such as hedonic activity or gait pattern, how the animal is moving around, how long they are sitting and standing. We are not talking about the gross level. We are looking at the moment-by-moment data, the minuscule level changes, how these subtle data can provide new information than the data that's available at the gross level. These indicators can provide changes in the intensity of the emotions change, but also can be used to detect and manage bigger issues like aggression, tail biting, feather picking, etc. When we look at the low-level features at the core of digital phenotyping, we can understand the location type. It could be an extensive farming system, such as animals grazing outdoors, or it could be indoor activities, such as poultry and swine-related farming, and also using vocalization and acoustic environmental data. When we capture this variety of data using a multitude of sensors, we can understand the location, movement, vocalization, and translate these raw data into animal emotion states. In terms of behavior and cognition, the broader context is absolutely essential in the analysis. So when we connect, when we create that linkage between the indicator and the construct, we can have a better understanding of the animal well-being, social dynamics, how do they talk to each other, how do a certain group of animals in a large flock of birds in the poultry industry dictate, decide, and influence the behavior of a whole lot of population. Those kinds of questions, hypotheses, and perspectives we can investigate using digital phenotyping with the aid of instrumentation and sensor technologies. Obviously, ethical considerations and the future play a significant role. We have to recognize, in terms of using the technologies and ensuring accuracy and also responsible application. So with the advent of explainable AI, it becomes very important for us to explain how do we use this technology, what are the implications behind it. Sometimes there is unconscious bias and there is unknown involved. What we don't know, can we be able to unravel that don't know component in terms of applying artificial intelligence and sensor technologies in acquiring data and developing trends, patterns, and insights that become really important. So we see some examples here. When I use the word emotions, the word can be divided into 2 components, emotion. E stands for energy here. Energy in motion. The energy comes in a variety of forms, for example, the blood composition. The blood always circulates in the body, so it carries cortisol, neuroendocrines, and lactate, and other components such as ketosis and beta-hydroxybutyrate and other metabolic components. Some of these biochemical markers are always present, but only when it exceeds a certain threshold level, it becomes problematic. The animal could become probably experiencing metabolic disorders or ketosis or stress level drastically changes and so on. So this is an energy in motion that can possibly be acquired non-invasively using some of the biosensors and biochemical minimally invasive sensor-based instrumentation. The second energy is what we call as bioelectrical energy. It's related to the heart rate, the respiration rate, how the lung capacity changes over a period of time. So we get to collect time frequency data here, and of course the brain-related activity. For example, we could use FMRS or other EEG-related wearable devices to acquire the data to understand the affective states or the mental capacity of the farm animals. Of course, heat has been studied quite a bit. Thermal energy is quite common. We acquire changes in the signatures on the face of the animals, and then we say something about how the bird experiences stress, either poultry birds, swine, or dairy cows. They always do thermoregulation by breathing inhalation, and so there's always a bit of activity in terms of bioheat changes that happen surrounding the nasal region in addition to the ear as well as along the ear region. So once we know the subtle changes in these regions, along with the other body, for example, the rectal region, the movement of the tail, we could create a correlation with the changes in the other component of the energy in the body of the animal to say some scientifically validated statements, develop indicators that could perhaps serve as a telltale sign of an indicator of welfare and physical physiological behavioral changes within the body of the animals. Of course, sound has been looked at recently, and also in the past for swine. We have a company called in Belgium from Bedman's Group. There is also chickens. People are looking at how do we acquire data to understand the gecko call. How do these chickens communicate? What is it that we need to understand because the frequency is so less among the high noise criteria? How do we make using data analytics? So when we combine all of these energy signatures, we could understand not only the behavioral, physiological, health-related aspects, but also more importantly, the mental makeup or the active states of these bones. So when I use the word emotion again here, it is a non-tangible concept, especially for farm animals. We are still unraveling. We are still trying to understand what constitutes an emotion for a farm animal. As an animal behavior scientist, as an ethologist, as a biological engineer, we still rely upon human psychology. So there is a possibility of objectification. There is a possibility of seeing through the lens of humans in terms of understanding these emotional makeup of these farm animals. Paul Ekman, as a scientist who actually came up with a variety of methodologies to determine and come up with different classes of emotions for humans. So we use that as a base and then keep on developing new indicators, new framework, new merits to establish and to create consensus. So using the consensus, we look at the different affective states. For example, it is time dependent, so we cannot label a human being as an angry person or a happy person because it fluctuates over a period of time. So is the case with the farm animals, also because the energy fluctuates and is context dependent and time dependent. So there is a true need for interdisciplinary collaborative research expectation here to be able to truly make a scientifically validated statement about the farm animal emotions here. So one of the key concepts here is what I call as a balance, or the so because it's time dependent. How does the intensity of the emotions changes over a period of time? That becomes crucial. For example, we develop a nice emotion measurement system using camera and other high technology tools. You know, in a barn, it's very common. We can see mosquitoes and flies. They move around because of the cow dung and other related environmental factors like humidity. So when the fly or the mosquito sits on the ear of the dairy cow would basically flap their ears. So there is a possibility for the system to pick up as a false positive or a true signal. So how do we overcome that? So these types of context-dependent understanding have to be infused into the automated sensing system, welfare continuous monitoring system, to be able to really have a validated system in determining the emotions and the affective states of these farm animals. It's much more than that. At least from the graph level, there are things that we have to go deeper and look into it for the true scientific validation of a system development for emotions measurement in the sensors. The second thing is stimulus processing. For example, we induce stimuli when we conduct an experiment to either a positive or a negative or a neutral indicator of emotions. But there is always a gray level. Sometimes when the stimulus is being induced based on the context, it may lie in both regions. So we have to be very careful in choosing the assumptions and the boundary conditions for the development of the systems here. A quick example in terms of chicken welfare, chicken stress measurements here. We developed a tool using a deep learning system to understand the chicken movement, chicken activity via our computer vision systems. The idea here is we install multiple cameras inside a barn, and from the top view and also from the side view. We are basically looking at how do they move around, how many steps they make towards the feeding station, how many birds try to flock together, what is their social network, what is the distance they travel or the migration coefficient each of these birds makes over a period of time. So we started with a small pilot scale with 40 birds in the enclosed system, and then we are currently looking at developing to the second phase in terms of expanding to more birds in a wider angle here just in a demo here. So what we are seeing here is a clip of the video that shows the birds moving. The system or the software we have developed is capable of differentiating. For normal human eyes, everything looks white, but based on the tiny little changes in the pixel density, the shape, and the size of the birds, they can actually pinpoint this as chicken 1, chicken 2, chicken 3, chicken 4. So we can differentiate, we can identify and discriminate the different birds, but also how do they go from point A to point B. That can also be measured, how many meters they travel over a period of time. That information can also be pulled in via the algorithm in determining the migration coefficient of these birds. So counting, identifying the birds in terms of the differences between them and the amount of activity or the movement they make. So when I go back here, we can see here in this. So for example, if you assume this is the barn, we have north, south, east, west. There is a bigger gradient on the northern side compared to the second here. So we can say based on the mathematical calculation from the results of the algorithm, the number of birds are primarily geared towards the north end of the barn compared to the eastern zone in the second figure at time point 2. So when there is a change in the wind or the humidity or the temperature conditions, how many birds make a preferred migration towards certain zones inside the poultry barn? So those kind of quantitative indices can be made, but also we can say something about the social network. How do they talk among themselves? How do they aggregate among themselves based on certain external influences in their own population or the flock? Those kind of quantitative phenotypic information can also be acquired using this information. There is a possibility to use deep learning along with the computer vision to understand the pecking behavior of these birds. So here we can see they are jumping again. It's an outdoor example. They are jumping and trying to peck against each other. So depending on the movement, how much vertical movement that happens, what is the amount of activity per bird? Using that we can establish a framework in determining and saying something about this bird is a bit more aggressive compared to the other bird and so on. So there is a framework we could establish in determining quantitative indices using this information. So here is an example here. What we are looking at is this is another study. We induced stress in the chicken birds. We did a 40-bird study. There were 2 stress were induced. One is using an umbrella. We suddenly opened an umbrella and shocked the birds. We, in another group of birds, we used an iPhone and Android phone to play a barking sound from a dog to create a negative induced stress. And we were interested in finding out how the vocalization changes, how the temperature on the surface of the birds, especially the eye region, the beak end region changes. Are there any correlations in terms of the heat stress and also the vocalization? Can we be able to elucidate some of the welfare indicators based on these information? So blinking also plays a role. For example, the number of blinks. This is a collaboration with Texas and M University to look at. They did a study on alien species for wild birds. So we were curious, is there a possibility for the eye blink, the number of blinks in the eye, the heat that is exchanged coming out of the eye region? Can that be an indice for welfare and correlate to the effective states of mental capacity? For example, in the bigger power-free industry, when the eggs hatch, these chicks, they never see their mother, so there is no possibility of social imprinting here. They have to learn everything from trial and error. As soon as they come out of the eggs, they start pecking, and then, okay, this is good, this is not good, and this big lack of social imprinting and lack of motherly affection, and the influences the later life. So sometimes this can also possibly contribute to aggressiveness in the birds because of the support system in the early life. The early life conditions dictate the late life resilience and the adaptation capacity of these birds. So from this context, we were looking at how the number of blinks and the data related to visual behavior of these birds, do they have a role in the welfare? Can this possibly be a facial indicator to say something about the welfare of these birds? So we can see some of the preliminary results. We collected data via regular camera as well as thermal camera to acquire temperature on the surface of these bodies. So we did a comprehensive study for about 12 weeks, 40 birds, the age of the birds versus the group flock density and the type of stress, whether it's an umbrella-based stress versus stress induced by noise, and how they create changes in the stress on these birds, and also fluctuation in the temperature on various regions of these birds. So some of the findings, we would say that this is a quantitative examination in terms of blinking as well as facial temperature variations in relation to the stress. Definitely, there was a huge change in the temperature, and the animals become automatically quiet in terms of vocalization. As soon as the stress is indicated, they become quieter. The vocalization, the gecko calls change drastically compared to the controlled birds. So they have 3 eyelids unlike human beings. Upper eyelid and lower eyelid, they have a vertical eyelid nictitating membrane that also played a significant role. So we started collecting feathers and blood samples to understand how the cortisol changes, based on specific context to understand is there any correlation with what the instrument and cameras measure with actual changes in relation to the blink stress. So the preliminary results show that yes, blink the full blinks, and the number of blinks can possibly be able to say something about the stress. But the biggest challenge is this is only 40 birds when we have to scale up for 10,000 birds in a poultry barn. How much resolution we need to have in terms of acquiring the videos and images, what's the data processing capacity, how the sub-level very, very fine scale changes that can be acquired for analysis. So those are some of the questions still remain that need to be further investigated. Here are some examples of the thermal cameras. We acquired a variety of data in terms of understanding the series of behaviors of the poultry birds. But again, upscaling is still a challenge. So when we use a thermal camera, the distance between the camera lens to the object dictates the quality and the resolution of the data. Once the bird moves away, the resolution changes, which causes an issue in terms of the accuracy and sensitivity of the actual data. We get it's a wonderful academic study, but for practical realization for industrial applications, still more research need to be done. We went ahead and acquired a variety of vocal sounds. So the idea here is to, once we collect this data, it's pretty noisy. There is a lot of humming sound and mechanical structure and operating habits. But we were able to use deep learning and a MEL frequency, MFCC coefficient in terms of subtracting the variety of noises and looking at the different smaller calls that were made by these birds. So it was interesting to see the variations before stress and after stress, and also how the age of the birds over a period of 12 weeks. How the bird starts to adapt, because during the first 2 weeks, they tend to feel immediately experienced stress. But after 6 weeks or 7 weeks of study, they get used to that stress. They kind of expect, okay, there is really no harm. So we were able to see those changes from the data analytics in terms of the changes in the frequency and the actual smaller changes in the neural network that clearly shows that birds were able to adapt after 6 or 7 weeks if they constantly induced stress to these birds. So the methodology here is we collect data, sound data, we convert the sound data into an image, a spectrogram. But you can see here in the yellow, and then we were looking for a neural network to be able to find out what are the buried information in there. We also used the MFCC. We can see some of the spectrogram signature, and went ahead and developed a variety of modeling approaches in understanding how these birds changes in their volume, the frequency in determining the various characteristics to acquire buried information, and classifying before stress and after stress. And one of the specific features that contribute to specific changes in their stress levels. Moving to the swine, very quickly, we did a little study in which we employed a 3-in-1 sensor, Internet of Things. This is a sapphire sensor which has the capability of collecting 3 types of data: respiration data, heart rate data, and also activity or accelerometer data. We actually collected data from 40 pigs, and we ended up using only from 5 pigs because pigs are notoriously mischievous, playful, and started eating the sensors. Then it reduced to 11 pig data, and then we were confident with only data from 5 pigs. So we did a variety of almost very extensive exploratory data using deep learning and machine learning approaches and understanding, or the correlation between heart rate pattern when pigs are in isolation during feeding, when after feeding, when they are packed together, how the heart rate changes. What is the influence of respiration rate in terms of the social context? A number of questions we were asking. How does the age affect the heart rate? The gait analysis, how the gait changes in terms of the stress. Based on the accelerometer, we were able to collect 3 types of data: sagittal, lateral, and vertical, X, Y, and Z axis. We did a very exhaustive data analytics using deep learning to address a bunch of questions using deep learning. The results are quite really interesting. We can clearly see that when the pig age moves from 83 to 108, there is a significant influence in terms of the age. The pigs become slower in activity as the age increases. There is a distinct difference between pigs. We are able to also elucidate, say a little bit something about personality. There is a bit of personality differences. Some pigs are playful. Some pigs tend to be more aggressive based on the correlation and the cluster analysis and the combination of respiratory, accelerometer, as well as the activity data. So it's at every day of 3 or 4 days a week. We were able to collect this data over a period of 12 weeks, and then we did a bunch of analysis. The data size is also a bit large, about 50-55 gigabyte of data acquired. Some of the preliminary analysis that shows how they are socially connected but physically isolated because they are put in crates. They can see each other, they can hear each other, but they cannot physically touch. Physically be in close. Once the feeding is finished, we open the crate and allow the pig to interact. So we can see the jump in the heart rate. Sometimes the pigs tend to mount, they demonstrate playful behavior. We were able to characterize each of these in a detailed manner based on the data we acquired. Obviously, feeding and post-feeding, they tend to lie down a lot. So we were able to correlate that information with the heat map, because simultaneously we were collecting a regular camera video and also a thermal camera along with this 3-in-1 multimodal data. We were trying to correlate with the erectile temperature, blood level cortisol to understand the information and the linkage between the actual physiology, the behavior and the changes in the indices as provided by these sensors and machine vision data. Here we can see the correlation map and the different parameters we measured: heart rate, breathing rate or respiration rate, variability, activity, posture, and so on. How these information and the interdependent parameters plays a significant role in providing telltale signs about the stress levels, thereby an indirect indication of the active states or mental states of these girls. Briefly, we also did a little bit of study to understand the lighting conditions, how different colors of LED influences the different behaviors. Are there any peculiar behaviors that changes between the lighting conditions? What are the advices we can provide? There are many companies nowadays that agree. There are quite a few companies. They sell different LED lighting systems. The one conclusion or finding we propose is that, hey, do not give a universal lighting, do not put a common lighting for the full floor. Try to give a zone-wise or a localized lighting to allow the bird to choose which lighting they want to be experiencing. This provision of choice to the birds not only improves the welfare, but also provides productivity improvement for the farmers. That's one of the findings from this study. Obviously, red tends to provide aggression. Sometimes if they see red under the red light, birds sometimes mistakes that is a red and start pecking more. The aggression also tend to increase under the red LED light in comparison to white and blue light. There is no one solution. It's context-based, age also dictates. Breeding type of the bird also dictates in terms of the choice of LED lighting to be decided. Here we can see about 23 different characteristics we acquired under various lighting conditions. We come up with what we call as the figures of merit. We give for this specific. For example, after feeding to induce pitching and to induce resting for the birds, you provide this combination and this intensity of lighting. That's the kind of advice we propose at the end of this study based on the data we have collected so far. There is a possibility also to predict the behavior, especially the pecking and the aggression-related behavior based on some mathematical modeling. It's still in the proof of concept. We haven't really elicited yet, but our data shows indicates that, hey, use this data to develop a predictive model and come back and validate based on the observation from ethologists and behaviors, is there a possibility at least 80-90% of success rate in terms of predicting the aggression and behavior-related indices. Couple of examples on measuring emotions in farm animals. We labeled or named the software as Urwolf. WUR stands for Washington University, and Wolf is a playful name because Wolf is the mascot of the Washington University. So we collected a bunch of videos and data of different conditions, and based on some of the previous work by other groups, Line MA, Baxter, the Scotland Rural Folks, and also other folks in Switzerland. We acquired some of those basic framework to understand whether we would be able to automate the measurement of the emotions just based on the facial indicators of dairy cows and pigs. There are two different approaches. One we call as an arbitrary units. What we do is the squinting of the eyes, how much pulse pressing of the lips happens, what is the direction of the ears, whether it's symmetrical, asymmetrical, whether they're histogram of gradients, and using these information and correlate the actual indices, aggression, fear, pain, happiness, neutral, playfulness, and so on and so forth. Similarly, we did for pigs also. Now with the deep learning approaches, we move away from the arbitrary units because we are now not relying only on the images. We are acquiring real-time video imaging, and we use the video to be able to analyze and picking those information to understand the changes in emotions. We also looked at the facial emotion recognition developed in Taiwan and Hong Kong and other research groups and tried to apply. Obviously, we cannot directly use that for farm animals. We have to adapt and understand the various changes. We were able to look at this information in terms of deep learning-based neural network and CNN-based metrics acquisition, but also from the arbitrary unit-based traditional, the oldest style in terms of acquiring the information in terms of changes in the indices as related to the different emotion makeup of these animals. A lot of applications we could see, for example, we could actually label this as Nina versus Sally versus David. We can actually intuitively identify the animals if we can clearly recognize these different futures, the changes in the futures of these faces of the animals. In addition to understand the mental makeup or the emotional states of these animals. There are many other applications, social network analysis, phenomics. We would be able to understand the trait between animals and between groups using the traits to correlate the behavioral traits, physiological traits to correlate with the genomic traits in terms of developing phenotyping for new applications. That's also a possibility using this biometric-based behavioral pattern understanding from the vision data composed of both images and video. Just a small framework here. We think we were able to show about 13 different emotions: relaxed, alert, neutral, aggression, positive, negative, excited, relaxed, and so on. We can see some of these, how the eyes are open, symmetric, asymmetric, forward, backward, eyes are upward, and so on. Again, we used a bunch of the data is not big, only 153 videos and 7,800 images for the Phase 1 study just to establish to see how much of accuracy it can give. Some of the data we collected just using a regular phone like a handheld iPhone and Android. Some we were able to collect using advanced high-resolution cameras. It's a mixed hybrid data quality we were able to use in this particular study. This is an example of how this works based on the YOLO v4 and YOLO v5 algorithms. Again, here, the take-home is the balance because it's very much time-dependent, context-dependent. The intensity of the emotions changes only at a certain particular time. It becomes very important to measure because ethologists and behaviors would disagree if I labeled a bird as an angry animal or a happy animal. We also need to know when we install cameras in the farms, when we do a real-time, continuous automated acquisition of data that sends information to policymakers, veterinarians, and others. We need to ensure that the data we get is of a higher quality and scientifically validated. We consider a variety of approaches in terms of validating some of these tools. It's an ongoing study, more like a baby stuff we have demonstrated. It's possible. We still need to more explore. There is a lot of debate happening between the neurologists and people from animal behavioral scientists in creating a consensus about the various nitty-gritty details and nuances that falls under the bigger umbrella of the emotions. So we need to establish standards and metrics to be able to come up with a better comprehensive understanding of the emotions. One of the take-home messages I would like to say is that we have used thermal camera, connect depth, regular camera, heart rate, respiration rate, and activity. Of course, we collect blood-based data such as cortisol, neuroendocrine, rectal temperature, saliva. We take saliva and do some ELISA-based tests to understand some of the biochemical markers to correlate. That's just only one angle. We need to expand this. We need to go for 4D or 5D cameras and also collect data using femurs and other instruments to acquire the brain-related information. For example, in one of the studies I showed before, the thermal video of pigs, the inner ear temperature is connected very close physically to the brain of the pig. So, there is a drastic change. When we look at the analysis of the variations in the thermal signatures, we were curious why only in the back end of the ear temperature changes drastically compared to the nasal and the eye region. So this tells that the ability of the transfer of heat varies between different regions of the face compared to snout, eyes, ear region, tip of the ear, and so on and so forth. So a little more research needed to further validate in terms of using more multimodality data along with spatial data, localization, activity data, olfactory breath analysis. Sometimes it can also provide information about the gut microbiota. Gut can be directly correlated to the mental capacity, functioning capacity of these animals. So there is a little more comprehensive multimodality approach that is obviously needed. A lot more need to be done for automated real-time measurements because some of these are bits and pieces and chunks of work done here and there. But when we integrate, synthesize, create synergy, it becomes more challenging. For example, the 40 birds we studied as an academic study. Obviously, it does not work in industry scale. Much more need to be changed. A lot of boundary conditions and variations has to be obviously changed for a large-scale adoption and application. So we have to consider cybersecurity, data security, ethical implications, farmers' perspective, because it has to be farmer-centric in terms of adoption and embracement of technologies. It's not a technology push. It has to be a pull. It has to be complementary, not replacing the employment of farmers. So these are bigger policy-related aspects we have to consider when we develop these technologies, validate these technologies for applications. Again, an emphasis on acquiring brain-based data along with smell-related data that has still to be incorporated, integrated with the existing data. I think maybe I would like to stop here. Just a picture to showcase some of the photographs I have taken during the summer term in Wageningen in the Netherlands. There is also an art show happening just 10 minutes walking distance from Arnhem, where my house was in the Netherlands. It's in the open scale. About 600 people came together as students mostly. They draw a variety of arts. It's really impressive and fascinating. Thank you so much for this opportunity to connect with you to share some of the work we have done. Maybe we can discuss if there are any questions. I'm happy to answer. Thank you.